Hello, welcome back. I'm Arunima Sarin. In today's video, we'll talk about the differences in getting a PhD in psychology from the US versus from the UK. This is a really important topic. I get loads of questions along these lines from potential students every year, but it's also really important because where you do your PhD from will determine what kind of training you get, what kind of research you end up doing, what resources you get, who you network with, who your mentor is. And so it's a big decision that will have a significant impact on your life. When deciding between wanting to do your PhD in psychology from the UK or the US, it's a big decision and has loads of different moving parts. It has loads of different points that you should consider. To make sure that we talk about all of these points in careful detail, I'm going to break this series down into different parts. So today's going to be part 1, and we will talk about the difference between these two countries when doing a PhD in psychology. And we'll cover only 2 topics, the difference between them in terms of their structure and their duration. So the first factor we'll talk about is the difference in duration. A PhD program in psychology in the UK is typically anywhere between 3 to 4 years, whereas a PhD program in psychology in America is anywhere between 5 to 7 years. So a big chunk of change, a difference in terms of these two programs and how long it will take to do your degree. Next, let's talk about the difference in structures of the programs. Now, the two countries broadly differ significantly in terms of how their respective PhD programs are structured. Let's look at the UK first. So, a PhD program in the UK has no coursework, typically, which means there is a lot of emphasis on starting with independent research from the very beginning. So, from day one, you enter and you have to start with your research program. You have to start doing the research that you propose to do in your application material. Now, a good thing about this approach is that it allows for a lot of independent research from the outset, right? From day one, you are immersed in doing the research you care about, and you're spending all of your time really just trying to build your research interest, build your research niche, and progress your career. Because the programs are structured this way, PhD programs in the UK place a really high demand for independence and a high degree of intrinsic motivation when it comes to your research, because you have to really be immersed in it from day one. To do well in these programs, also, you need to have a very clear idea of the research you want to do, precisely because you have to start doing it pretty much as soon as you start. So you need to have a really clear research program, a research question. You need to hopefully have the relevant skills to be able to carry out that program, and you need to have a high degree of motivation and independence, so experience doing that work independently so that you can jump right in from day one. Across the pond in the United States, if you do a PhD in psychology, you spend the first 1 to 2 years taking on coursework. Some of it is made mandatory by the department, by the program. So, courses in statistics or some core classes from your department. So the classes, you have a choice on what you want to do. So you can pick topics and classes that you want to specialize in or get specialized training for. There's also various benchmarks and kind of milestones you have to cross, which require you to give talks or write proposals or meet with your dissertation committee or parts of your dissertation committee pretty early on. And so the first couple of years are really spent in getting trained and acquiring a broader educational base. And then the next kind of 3 to 4 years are devoted to building your research program. I talk about the structure of a PhD program in psychology in the US in much more detail in this other video. So take a look at that if you are interested in understanding how the structure works more carefully. Because you take all of these classes earlier on in your PhD program, you have the opportunity to get exposed to new literatures, potentially learn about new methodologies and new approaches, and you have the opportunity to refine your research interest, to refine your research questions. And so you don't necessarily have to squarely do what you had written in your research proposal from day one. At least as a scientist, independently, you have the space, the opportunity, the time to build those ideas, to refine those ideas. To kind of summarize, right, the UK PhD system is anywhere between 3 to 4 years, and you kind of hit the ground running from day one with your research. Whereas in the US, the program's anywhere between 5 to 7 years, but even on the lower end, which is 5 years, you spend the first 1 to 2 years taking classes, doing coursework, and then the remaining 3-ish years working independently on your research. So if you'll think about this, both programs have about 3 to 4 years where you do nothing but specifically work on your research and really prioritize the research you want to do, and building a research question and your research niche and your research career. One key difference is whether you prefer to have those additional years of getting trained and acquiring knowledge about more literature, more methodologies, or not. You get the opportunity to acquire that training in the US, but not in the UK, at least not directly. You can apply for programs that have a 1+3 structure, where you kind of do a master's for the first year and then do your PhD for the remaining 3. So there are those opportunities, but for the most part, typically a PhD program in the UK in psychology is 3 to 4 years where you only really do research. So like I had said at the beginning of this video, when we talk about picking between the UK or the US for your PhD, there's loads of factors to consider, and in upcoming videos we'll talk about the remaining factors. But if you were basing your decision based on just these 2 topics that we've covered today, which is duration and structure, a set of key features I would pay attention to when deciding between them, just based on the 2 topics that we covered today, is what your learning style is, what your career goals are, and what your prior experience is. If you've had extensive experience in getting trained on how to do research, which includes having training in statistics, some kind of coding language, R, Python, MATLAB, you have some experience doing research independently. So, reading the literature, coming up with a question, coming up with hypotheses, building an experimental design, piloting it, kind of iterating over that process, deciding your statistical procedures. So running the whole gamut. If you have prior experience with that, if you have a really clear question in your head, and you know exactly what you want to study, then probably the UK system is better, because you get to do that from day one. And it's a much faster career trajectory. You can, be done with your PhD in 3 years, do a 2-year postdoc, and in the time that someone is just getting out of their PhD from the US, you're really ready to start applying for faculty positions already. So it's a much faster turnaround, and it's a lot more independent, which, a lot of people prefer. They have a clear idea of what it is that they want to do, and they just really want to get started. Then the UK system might be better suited to you. On the other hand, if you don't have too much prior research experience, or maybe have some research experience but really want to get more training and more systematic training, then the US system might be much better and much better suited. So I did my master's in research methods in psychology from the UK, from University College London, and I did my PhD in psychology in the US from Harvard University. I found the first 1 to 2 years where you get to take classes really, really valuable, in huge part because it gave me the necessary training to think more carefully about the science that I was doing, and the questions that I was interested in really evolved because of taking the classes that I did, and it ended up having a really positive impact and influence on the research I did. Because I got exposed to a lot of different literatures and methodologies that I wouldn't otherwise have probably become familiar with if I was just doing the research that I wanted to do. And so I like learning about new things, and reading about cool science, cool studies in psychology makes me really excited, makes me really happy. It makes me, it reminds me of why I chose to do this for a career. And so taking those classes in the first 2 years really reignited the passion that I already felt towards the field, and it made me really excited to be part of this field, and it really broadened my research horizons. So I found it really, really valuable to have a program where I received systematic training, both in terms of skills, but also in terms of the content and the literature I was exposed to. All right, that's it for today's video. Next week, we will talk about the difference between the UK and the US system in terms of the differences in their funding and financial constraints. Until then, subscribe for more content like this, check out my website for more academic resources, and don't forget to like this video. I will see you next week.